Je comprends que ça. Tout de suite.
So, just I want to say one thing to the people connected online to see if they can hear this well or not.
You're fine.
Yeah, it's good.
And you can see the slide too. I also share with you the slide in case if you need. I share the link to download the slide.
No, it looks good.
No.
Okay. I can start. Can I start?
It's 4. So we start.
Tu veux présenter le jury? Tu veux présenter le jury d'abord?
C'est ça. Je me mets.
Ouais.
So first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to Alberto Jovane PhD. It's with a very great pleasure that I accepted to chair this jury. So first of all, I will introduce the jury, the members of this jury. Then you will present your work for 45 minutes, and then there will be a question and answer session before we deliberate. So I don't know exactly where we deliberate, but we'll see then.
I'm not sure
Okay.
either, but we will manage.
Should be in the room next to it actually.
Okay, so first the jury presentation. This jury is composed of 5 members, 8 if we include the 3 invited members. So Mrs. Rachel MacDonald, who is connected in video conference, is an assistant professor at Trinity College Dublin. Mr. Michael Neff, also connected in video conference, is a professor at the University of California, Davis. Mrs. Nuria Pelacciano is an assistant professor at the Universitat Politècnica de Catalunya in Barcelona. And then the PhD supervisors, namely Julien Pétri, who is a research director at INRIA Rennes Bretagne Atlantique, and who is the director of the Thesis. Marc Cresti, who is an assistant professor at the University of Rennes. Ludovic Oyer, who is a research scientist at INRIA. And Claudio Pacchiarotti, so sorry for your name, who is a research scientist at CNRS. And myself, who is a professor in computer science at University Bretagne Sud and also member of ERISA lab. So you have 45 minutes to present your work.
Okay, so we start. So hi everyone, so I'm Alberto Jovane and I'm here to talk about the project of my thesis, which is titled Modeling of Reactive Movement and Non-Verbal Behavior for the Creation of Digital Actors for the Virtual Reality. So I know the title is pretty long, so we'll break it down in a few relevant keywords, starting by digital actor, and define what is a digital actor. So we'll use any digital model representing a human figure. I will give you an example. Actually, we start from first recognized model of virtual human, which was created in 1968, and the idea was to design this model to optimize the design of cockpit of airplane. And as you can see here, the model was fitting a specific purpose. Nowadays, we can create a more advanced model that can fit a particular purpose. So we'll give you a brief overview of how we define model nowadays and which tool we use. Starting, I will identify 3 main steps, 3 main phases. First phase is the generation, so the creation of the model itself and way to control the model. We can use tools such as Blender, for example, to sculpt the physiognomy of the character, or we can use like online libraries like Rocketbox and MetaHuman that we use both of them in a contribution that we'll show in this presentation. Second step is the animation. So once we have the model, we want to move it and we want to create the motion. And also here we can identify 2 main approaches. One approach can be designed by hand, the evolution through time of pose and posture. And another approach can be capturing the performance of an actor and using technologies such as motion capture suit or camera to see the face. Last phase is the intelligence part. And this step is kind of a blurry step, so it's not really defined. What we mean by intelligence is we try to simulate human-like behavior for virtual character. One example can be spatial intelligence, so having characters that are aware of their environment, that, for example, find a path to reach an object or avoid obstacles. Once I explain how a model can be created nowadays, I will show which one are the application and identify here two main categories. First category I will define is unidirectional, you will see why, are applications such as movies and cinema, or can be such as having a virtual character presenting news in a broadcast. And this is, I know that probably most of you haven't seen it yet, but there are companies working on this, and we're probably going to see it in the near future. And then the second category has the characteristic of having virtual human on which we can interact to. And one example can be video games, where we typically use it as a controller and can control the motion of the character and interact with other characters. We can have digital assistants, so probably most of you has done some interaction with voice assistant. We have it in our smartphone or we have devices at home. But we do believe that in the near future, this digital assistant will also have a body appearance. And that is an example that's already present in the University of Barcelona. Finally, the last application I will show is an artistic installation. And I want to show you the application because that's the characteristic of being in an immersive environment. So visitors of the exposition are wearing a virtual reality headset and their motion is tracked and they are completely immersed in virtual reality. And so here I show somehow three different levels of interactivity of how we can interact with virtual human. As I mentioned down in the slide, some of these examples come from present project. So we'll do a brief parenthesis of what is the present project. Actually, the present project is a European project that founded my thesis, which was focusing on creating a specific model of virtual human, which was highly realistic, which demonstrates emotional accessibility, and which is capable of talking, and finally, which perform believable and reactive motions. And that is the part where we focus on. As you can imagine, yes, this part is related with animation, so the motion of the character, but is also related with this kind of concept we say of simulated intelligence. We'll see better why later on. So this reactive is actually our second keyword of our title. And reactive means when someone performs an action, having a character that is able to respond. Can also mean, for example, awareness, having a character that is aware of the presence of other character. Can be a social interaction. And more in general, it belongs to this area of communication. So the last keyword of the title I will present is actually non-verbal. So we are narrowing it down, so we are not focusing on all the kind of communication, but we just focus on non-verbal communication. So the communication that is not related to spoken languages. I will give you some example of some of the non-verbal features we can have. We can have eye gaze, for example, if a human do eye contact or not, or where he's looking. We can have the posture and the gesture of the character, and that's a sort of communicative, like, for example, motion. You can see better now with facial expression. You can infer what is the mood of the character. We can have other features such as relative position, so how close you get to you, or eventually, if you get too close, the touch. So once I define this keyword and in general context, I want to give also a general objective. So the objective of my work, I like to think is as a way of reduce the distance between us, the user, the human part, and the virtual character. So when you're going to see this eye during the presentation, these represent us, represent our point of view on the virtual world, on the virtual character. And then we have, of course, the virtual human and the digital character. So I will just give another example of an application that is not really there now, but is going to be there in the near future. That it's a shared environment when virtual human and human can interact freely. So it's the one that we know as a metaverse. And I want to make a focus on how we will be able to access this environment. So there are going to be different access media. We can have display screen, like television or our smartphone. We can have input device, so we can have a first level of interaction. Or as we said before, we can be totally immersed in the environment. So having these different access media lead to having two different viewpoints. One is external, where we have the user that is seeing the virtual environment, and see event happening in this virtual environment. And one other one that is the internal point of view, where the the user is free to move around and interact with the character. So let's narrow down exactly which are the research direction of my work. So my research is a transversal research which touches different points of this wide context of the simulation of virtual human and the interaction with virtual environment. So first research direction is related to animation and animation editing, and that's actually also is my main contribution. And the idea here is, as we said before, it's try to create a model to simulate animate character that can simulate reactiveness and intelligence. So our idea was to get an animation system and to move us, the observer, as a part of the animation system. So be part of the modelization of the animation of the character. And we're going to see better later how. Second contribution, actually second and third contribution, are related to this idea of being merged in a virtual environment. And we're going to study, in the first studies, these are studies that I did in collaboration, so not as a main author. We're going to study gaze perception, so how us, human, perceive gaze of virtual character, and how this gaze can be imported to engage interaction. Third work, it's another study, and it's related to the study of the effect of touch simulation, so how we can simulate contact, which are the benefits of simulate contact between us and virtual character. And finally, we're going to step back from the immersive environment, and we will describe a system to convey events to an audience. So having events happening in real time in a virtual world, and having an audience following and seeing these events. So I will just give a brief now overview of a state of the art of this topic, starting by animation. So I like to think of research in animation as an adaptation problem, because as we said before, we have technology nowadays to create really faithful animation or to create the animation that fit the purpose we want. So what research is trying to do, it's trying to find a way to adapt the animation and the motion of character to different situations in order not to have to create a new motion all the time. And I will give you some examples, it's going to be clearer. We can have adaptation, for example, to a path, and this is the idea of presenting this work, where the input of the system is a trajectory, and the system tries to generate a working animation over it. And as you can imagine, this can be really useful for applications such as video game or crowd simulation. We can have adaptation to environment. This is an example of a physical-based simulation paper. And you can see the character here. The motion is generated in a way that is adapted to, for example, a ground that is not regular or holding to a wall. Or we can have this kind of system that is not generating animation, but is adapting the animation of a character jumping over an obstacle. And the idea here, we record an animation of this jump, and we want to adapt to different size of obstacle or different starting position. We can have adaptation of contact. This is another work based on physical-based simulation, and I want to focus on this example. There is a character jumping on the other one, or we can have like more contact as a fighting and generation of fighting motion. So, and we can see a lot of research that are related with this adaptation problem. But what we see that it was missing was this idea of adapting the motion to an observer. We actually find a work dealing with this problem. And the idea here, I will show you probably with the first image on the left.
I just lost your audio. I don't know if it's just me.
Yeah, same. We lost the audio when the video came on. Yeah.
Okay, now it's fine.
Is it okay?
Because there is only one button. Sorry.
Okay. So I will go on, and so I will say that here the idea is to optimize the visibility of the animation of the female character. That's not really what we want to do. Our work, as we see later, is most related to edit the cinematic properties of the character instead of finding the optimal path and optimal orientation. Let's move on now to the set of the art related to the second group, and let's define again how to immerse in virtual environment. So we have a set of devices, where you already see something, and devices can be virtual reality headset, we have visual feedback to see the virtual environment. We can have motion capture suit to see our own body and get embodied in an avatar. We can have haptic feedback, and in this case we can have like external devices or wearable devices that simulate the touch. Once we have these immersive technologies and we can put a person inside a virtual world, well, we have to evaluate how much this person perceive the virtual world as close as possible as the real one. I will show you here two of the most famous perception metrics. One is presence, that is the feeling of being in a place, and another one is embodiment, so how much we feel the virtual body as our own. And these two are typically evaluated with a standardized questionnaire. So also here, this is a wide topic of research. I will just show a few examples of studies of perception in virtual reality. One can be perception of virtual crowd, such as these studies, where we study how we do perceive virtual crowd, and this can be used, for example, to train public speech or for therapy for anxiety. We can have study on navigation and how the perception of virtual character change in relation to, for example, some attitude of pedestrian, for example, gaze. Or we can have study on touch and way to simulate touch between human and virtual human. Finally, the last related works area is, as I said before, stepping out from the virtual world and finding technique to convey to an audience in the best possible way events. So what we have to control here, we have to control the camera, because once we control the camera, we control the point of view, and we control how the image is seen by the audience. And we're going to focus probably on, mostly on 3D application, because are real-time 3D application, such as, for example, video games. So starting from video games, I want to give you an overview of which one are the kind of camera that we use. That can be first-person camera, where the user see from the point of view of the character. We can have third person, where the camera is linked to the character, but it's from the back and following the action. And we can have some work that try, for example, optimize visibility of the motion of the character. Or we can have external static cameras that just placed by the designer somewhere, or external dynamic. And we can have also some way study that try to optimize visibility and path planning. Once we have this technique, once we have a set of techniques to put camera in places, what is missing is how we're going to put this camera. So we decided to follow, the idea is to follow a language that people understand as an audience. And so the idea is to convey experience in a cinematographic way. And there is work that deal with this and try to find optimal camera position following a set of style taken from cinematographic. And here you can see there is the interaction of the character, there is a motion, there is a fighting scene, and the camera generated according to different style. And that's actually more or less what we want to obtain. But our goal will going to be mostly related to populated environment. So knowing an environment and put camera and manage this camera to create stylistic result. So that's all for the state of the art. And I will now deal with the contribution, starting by the main contribution related to animation. So as I said before, we want to create a system that consider the observer and the user as a part of the animation model. The main idea is to adapt the motion of a virtual character to a viewpoint. I will give you the example of how this works. So we have this character, we have to think this is a motion we captured or we created of the waving character. And this motion works really well. So now it's waving toward toward the audience now. But what if in our video game, in our experience, the observer is not in front, was on the side? Well, or we need to record another motion, or we would like to have the character to adapt. What if the observer is on the other side again? What is down? What if it's down? What if it's far? And there is an obstacle in front. And so we expect the character to bend on forward. So the idea here is, okay, that's the system we want to create. And why we want to create this kind of system? First, as you can imagine, for visibility and orientation, as I see. But also because once we give this character the simulation of awareness, so awareness toward an user, toward another character, well, we can also try to simulate expressive motion. And we'll see some example of this. So this is the tool that we developed is a real-time editing tool. And it's inspired actually not from the animation world, but from robotics, inspired by a branch of robotics which is called visual servo, which focus on the control of robotic arms giving a visual feedback. So the idea here is there are two frameworks. One is high to end, when we have the camera on the robotic arm and we try to control the motion from what the hand can see. Or we can have a second framework where the camera is outside that is most similar to what we want to do. So we have an observer outside and we have the motion that is adapted. Starting from this, we develop our system. As I said before, it's an editing system, so we get a motion as input. We pass it to the system, and what we want to obtain at the end, it's the adapted motion. So I will show you how the system works, and the system works on 3 main steps. First step is actually to see what the observer sees. So have a quantification of what is the perceived motion of the observer. And that is the evaluation of visual feature. In order to obtain this quantification, we start by rendering the scene from the observer point of view. Once we render the scene, we have a set of pixel-based operations that quantify numerically which one is the apparent motion of this character. And so, given that we are rendering the scene, our result will be affected by visual occlusion and lights. So we have to add this input to the system. Here is a list of the static, the apparent motion feature we use. We have a static coverage, that is a quantification of how much of the character motion occupy the field of view of the observer. We have the extension, that it's rated to coverage, by the way, is how much in the horizontal and vertical axis this coverage is occupied. And we have the motion coverage, that is coverage related to previous frame. It's also important to say that we need to focus our attention when we evaluate visual feature on specific body parts. So in each example, I will explain why we select specific body parts. The idea here is to, of course, improve performances, so just narrow down the set of features, but also to have a better understanding of which one are the salient part for specific interaction, specific animation. But this will be clearer after when I will show the example. Let's move to the second step. So the second step, once we can analyze how the motion is observed by the point of view, we are going to see how to modify it. And so the second step is related to the warping of character kinematics. That means having a set of independent high-level controllers that can modify the motion and the kinematic structure of the character. And the list of warping units, so-called warping units that we use, is there. And with this part of the code, we are able to modify the motion of the character. So once we have these two parts, what is missing and how we put them together? So the idea here is to find a way to control the kinematic of the character, so to modify the character motion using visual feature. So what we do, we put them together and we select, as we decide to use a Jacobian iterative solver, which try to optimize this relation. In order to optimize the relation, we have to define a target. So what is missing is the definition of a visual target. Also here we have 3 kinds of target we can select. One is the increment, so try to increment one of these visual features we analyze. One is the decrement, and one is the maintenance. Once we have the target in place, then we have all the system working, and we can try to minimize an error between what is the visual target and what is the visual feature we evaluate. I will show the example. I think it's going to be clearer. So we'll start by the first example. We have this motion. As you can see, there is this male character which is waving. And the idea here, it was that the design of the scene is we want this character to call us. And we are seeing from the point of view of the observer. As you can see here, if you see someone doing that, you might think it's not waving at us, it's waving at its own computer screen. So maybe it's doing a call or whatever it is. So what our system needs to do is need to adapt this motion to make it oriented toward us. So what we do here as parameterization, we set to increase the coverage of face, the torso, and the hand. Why we select this body part? So face, because here we're engaging in interaction. Face is one of the most salient parts while interacting. Then we have the hand, because the hand is the waving end, so because we know already which one is the motion that we're going to get. And finally the torso, we get more visibility. And the warping units that we select are typically the one linked to the selected body parts. We see another example with the same parameterization, same problem, someone is waving at us, and the idea here is to adapt the motion in order to make it more visible. Another example with the same parameterization, and this is important to see how the tool can work also with dynamic occlusion. In this case, there are like a crowd of people working in front. Let's move to another example. This is a little bit more complex because it's not the input motion is not anymore a cyclic motion, so the adaptation should be done fastly. And so the original motion is we record the motion of someone showing something on a tablet, for example, a picture or a news. And what we want to do again, adapt it according to the observer position. In this case, what is particular here is that we are not trying to increase the coverage of a body part. What we're trying to increase is the coverage of the tablet. So what the system does is try to maximize the visibility of this tablet. And so it adapts the motion of the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist to make it more visible for the observer. Let's move on. And this is actually the opposite parameterization. In this case, we don't want to anymore to make a part of the body more visible, but we try to make it less visible. And so what we set as parameter, we set a coverage decrement of face and torso. We have this animation on the right on the left, I would say, that of the character holding the shield. And as soon as we set this parameterization of try to reduce the coverage, what he does, he holds up the shield to cover his face. So let's move to a second set of examples, that the one I was mentioning before, of once we can control visibility, so we can control visual feature, we thought about why we can not try to create expressive motion or change and vary the expressivity of a character. In this case, we record a motion of a gesture, of talking gesture. And as I say, we are not focusing on spoken languages, so the face is not recorded, it's just static. But let's focus on the upper body part. And the idea here, we want to try to create a motion that is more extraverted. Extraverted from literature, we know that it means to having a motion that is more open and wider. So what we do, we try to increase the coverage again, increase the extension of the motion, and try to make the motion more open and wider. In the same way, in the next example, we try to create a motion that is more introverted. So even here, we try to play with this visual feature parameter. So we try, in this case, to decrement the coverage and decrement the extension, and we try to maximize this part of self-occlusion to make the character more close and narrow it on itself. And also, we control the face, and we try to make it look down, so we reduce the coverage of the visibility of the face. So that's all for the example I want to show you today. And let's deal with the limitation of this tool. So some of the limitations are clear for this explanation. So parameters, there are a lot of parameters we have to set manually. This parameter typically depends on the result we want to obtain, so of the visual target and all the kind of animation we have. But this is one of the limitations that worry me less, because we have way in which we can automatize this process for specific elements. Another limitation can be failing cases. So I will show you some example. This is a case where we have again the waving motion. The character that is occluded in dark is both occluded by this column and also in dark. And the system is not able to find a solution because the variation that is evaluating are not going out from this darken area. Another example of failing cases, same problem, we are the waving character. And we try to maximize the coverage of his hand. And the system understood that if you make the hand pass through the wall, well, it's going to be visible. So the visibility is higher. But as we know, this is not possible in the real world. Another example, this is a little bit more tricky, probably also less visible. So here is again the motion of the tablet. We don't have the tablet, but it's to imagine that the idea was always to maximize this object in the hand of the character. And as you can see, the motion is kind of okay. There is some problem flickering, but the problem is the way the tablet is displayed at the end. It's not vertical, but it's diagonal. And that's another set of problems we can have with this kind of system. And finally, another problem that I show you here, it's a problem of losing realism, because in this motion, it's probably not so much visible, but we have the character that self-occludes, so that his arm passed through his body. So as future implementation, I will start by saying, okay, we can automatize more the parameter, and we can have some system to adjust the motion for this kind of failing cases I said before. So we can have, for example, a system to check for collision, or a system to check for a sort of like realism, for example, if the character loses the balance for his center of mass falling away from his base. Another system like this that now we don't have implemented. So for now, the idea was we try to reduce as much as possible the amount of limitation we perform of the character for two reasons. First, because we want to avoid failing cases, as you saw. And second, because we want to maintain the original intention of the motion. And we can't guarantee with the system now that the motion is going to stay the same and is going to look the same at the end. Another improvement can be the performance optimization. Of course, we did some work on this, but performance can be optimized even more. And finally, a kind of wider idea, instead of just edit motion, because here, as I said before, we get a motion as an input, we can think about a system that uses similar approach, analyzing visual feature, but that focus on generating the motion. Give you an example. For example, as you see, the character never have, for example, a step on the side, because we focus on upper body motion, upper body editing, and we're not able to generate motion. Another example can be selecting from which hand to wave. So here we keep from granted that the system choose the animation we need to edit, but we can have a system that choose the animation based on visual analysis. So once we create this system, once we see the limitation, we want to evaluate it and see, will this system be useful? So we designed an experiment in virtual reality, and our idea was to understand whether this system that we create can help user in virtual reality understand the intention of virtual agent. So we get 16 participants. We design a virtual office. We put the user down there, where there is the eye, waiting in line, and he's waiting until one of these office clerks call him with the motion of the hand. So we compare our technique with a standard rotation and orientation of the body of the character. And this is how the trial looks like. So person was embodied in a character waiting, and he's waiting for one of the virtual clerks to call him. As soon as you're going to see, he detects the motion. He was asked to understand toward who this motion was directed. So it was directed toward me or toward someone else of the people waiting. And then we evaluate the accuracy, so how much the user were accurate with our technique and with the other. So as a result, we find that actually our techniques help, and we get a significant increase in user accuracy. And we did find another interesting result. So we had a questionnaire to participants, and one question of this questionnaire was, which are, in your opinion, the visual clue that you use the most to understand the intention of the character? And most of the participants mentioned body posture, that is the things we are modifying, but 100%, so all of them, mentioned gaze. And I have to say, gaze in our experiment were always directed to the right target. But as you can imagine, sometimes it's hard to see if someone is looking at you or if someone is looking at a person next to you. But it's important to say here that gaze is one of the most prominent clue that we use to understand the intention of other characters. So our idea was, so let's study gaze, and that's the second contribution I will present here. And the focus of the contribution is how gaze can be used to initiate interaction in virtual environment. So the purpose of this work was to study a well-known psychological study, which is called the stare in the crowd effect, which states that there is a search asymmetry between directed and averted gaze while facing a crowd. That means that when we face a set of people in front of us, we easily and fastly detect gaze that are directed toward us, that gaze that are directed away. Yeah, same example with the character. So the idea is, will this effect hold in virtual reality? That was the question we have. We started from a previous work that was based on photographic stimuli. So we were showing picture to participants. We were tracking their eyes and see whether they're looking more at directed gaze and averted gaze. And so we try to reproduce the same. That's our virtual model with virtual character. And so what we do as a design, that's actually the two of them. We had 30 participants, and we show to each one of them 4 different conditions. So 2 static cases, when first static case, everyone of the virtual crowd was looking away. Another static case where still again, all the crowd was looking away and just one character was looking directed toward the participant. And 2 dynamic cases with the variation from all averted and one directed, and one directed that changed to averted. I will show you now the result. I mean, this is the example how the tool works and which one was the setup. So as a result, we verify the presence of stare in the crowd. So we find that actually users tend to look more in the eyes and when there are directed eyes contact. And then we also had an interesting result. We get a negative correlation between social anxiety and directed gaze. So that means that participants that has a higher level of anxiety that we evaluate through a questionnaire tend to look less a directed gaze in virtual reality. And so the question of this paper was to understand wherever like gaze it's relevant to initiate interaction in virtual reality and how we can control this gaze to make it more relevant for participants. Let's move on and let's move to the second study. In this case, we are dealing again with problem of immersion in virtual world, and we are dealing with the problem of having person being able to freely interact with virtual character. So what does it mean? Free viewpoint might have the consequence of having a person, like you can see on the left video, that it's embodied and is found in an environment with a lot of character and that to move around. And in this kind of situation, it's kind of hard in the real world not to collide with someone. So our question was, can we simulate contact? Can we simulate contact? And is this simulation of contact relevant for a participant, for a person immersed in virtual reality? So we designed a setup. We had a virtual reality headset. We had a suit to embody the character in the virtual body. And we had 4 wearable armbands which simulate contact with vibration. How this worked? As you can see, we have the character moving around, and as soon as the character touch or get in contact with a virtual character, it feels the vibration of his arms. And so once we define this setup, the idea is, let's see which one are the effects on the behavior of participants while wearing haptic devices. So we designed a experiment with 23 participants and 2 conditions. 2 conditions is without the haptic device, so without the vibration, and with haptic device. And for each participant, we had this sequence of trial. First, a set of trial with no haptic feedback, then a set of trial with haptic feedback, so feeling the contact, and then once again with no haptic feedback to see if there is a sort of learning effect. And so if the presence of haptic device will help them behave differently, also when this contact simulation is not there anymore. So I will now summarize the result of this paper, starting by saying that we didn't have any effect on global trajectories. That was kind of expected. That means that participants take kind of the similar path when they were without haptic feedback and with haptic feedback. That's because we know that people tend to use visual information mostly to select a trajectory. That means that you typically decide before where to go instead of waiting to collide to someone and then decide. We didn't get any improvement for our presence embodiment questionnaire. And we believe it's caused by the fact that we are simulating contact with vibration. And so we know that in the real world, when you feel a contact, you don't feel a vibration, but you feel a force. And so that's why we think that there was no improvement. But we had effect on local avoidance behavior. So that means that person that were feeling the contact tend to, for example, squeeze more to avoid the contact between character, or tend to rotate the shoulder more, or as we can see here, they tend to collide less and have less volume of interpretation. And that actually was the part where I was in charge on this paper. So once we have seen an overview of this study, so we have seen how the perception of gaze and contact affect behavior of participant in virtual environment, let's step out and move on the last contribution. This one is actually a technique. And as I said before, it's a technique to convey event to an audience. The idea here is start from a known environment, so start from the environment, and try to think on where event can happen in real time. And the goal, as I said before, is to convey a cinematographic experience to an audience. So the tool, it's organized in 2 steps. We have an offline approach, which generates a camera graph, and then we have an online approach, where the camera is moved over this graph to follow the action of character. I will start by defining how this offline approach works. So we start, as I say, with the 3D environment, and we perform a first level of abstraction. So we extract what is the navigation mesh. Navigation mesh, it's a typical mesh that it's used in video games, and it's actually defined the area where character can move there are tools that extract automatically this mesh, and they're typically flat area of the environment. After that, we perform a second level of abstraction. So from the mesh, we compress the mesh into the skeleton, and so we get a line, a point and a line, and that, for us, represents the potential path a character would take if moving in this environment. So the idea here is try to abstract the environment, try to see where character can be in real time, and try to put camera that see this environment. So the next step is actually putting camera. So we raycast from this skeleton, and we create a set of camera that have the characteristic of being able to see the path. So once we have this cloud of points, that are cloud of cameras, we cluster them and we filter the unfeasible solution. Of course, in this process, we can have additional parameter for defining style of the camera we want to generate. After we generate the camera graph, we obtain something like this. This is a corridor, and the orange and green points are camera points and camera tracks. And then the idea here, okay, once we have this graph, and once we have events going on in this environment, is try to select the optimal way to convey this event following some style. So the online approach gets, as I said, the graph, a style, and a strategy. It selects a target on the graph, evaluating iteratively the frame quality for each of the position around the character, and then move the camera smoothly to follow this target, and then obtain the final shot. We can have a strategy, for example, I will not go too much into detail, but to perform cut, so to change between camera position to camera position. But we will see in the result. So that's an example of how the tool works. You have the character moving, and from top you can see the red point. It's the target that we define iteratively, and the target change wherever there is, you find a better position to frame the events. And then we have the green line, which is the camera path that is following this target smoothly and try to catch up and follow the character. Here is an example of different style. As I say, we can define different style and also different cut strategies. I don't know if it's super clear, but there is a character moving again in this environment, and on green we have a camera that is created trying to maintain a long shot, so it means that seeing the character from far and try to frame all the character, and we perform cut, so we'll see the camera jumping around. On purple, we have this medium to long shot that never perform a cut, and so the path is trying to follow where the character can go and never cutting. And finally, we have static camera, so we'll see a yellow camera popping up around. And this is an example of a final result of a medium shot with no cuts following the character. So I'm going to conclude now. I know I present a bunch of work that are kind of a transversal exploration of this idea of having virtual character and interaction in virtual environment. And what I do believe is in the near future, we will have more and more applications when virtual humans are going to be central. So I don't want to discuss here future work for each single cases, also because I don't have time, but I would like to give a general idea of why this kind of transversal exploration might be relevant for the definition of virtual human. So this is typically the goal. Once we put the central virtual human as a center, is to have more believable and reactive character. And the idea is having a way to link together this kind of word. What I mean, like I present a word to model the animation of the character. I present a technique to model the animation of the character. I present some study of perception. And I present some study of, for example, sensorial simulation. What I think as my work, when I think as my work in the thesis, I think that these are sort of preliminary work to create models that are considering all these steps together. So an example can be having an animation model which is aware of the perception of how users perceive the virtual character animation. Or similarly with touch feedback that can help then define how the character should behave and should react to a touch sensation. And similarly, we can think of a way of how virtual cinematography, and so conveying event to an audience, might be related to how character act, because that's actually what it happens on movies and in cinemas. We have a director that select the best way to frame action, and we have actor that perform the action knowing from which point of view they were seen and they will be seen. And so the idea here, to summarize, is to study more and try to get a better idea on which one are the link between this area and this topic. So thank you for the attention. That was all. And if you have any question, please ask.
Okay. So thank you very much, Alberto, for this very clear, synthetic, and very well illustrated presentation. So, thank you. We will now move on to the question and answer session. And we first start with the two reviewers. And I propose that Michael Neff starts asking the first questions. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I really enjoyed your thesis, and it is a very broad collection of work, but a very interesting collection of work. I'll probably ask most of my questions about chapter 2. We'll see how time goes, but I really like this idea. It's just a very natural problem formulation that people have generally not used. There's been almost no work that's really considered creating animation from a particular viewpoint. And you read it and you're like, yes, of course we should be doing this. So it was a really nice piece of work and a nice idea. So I appreciated it a lot. First question is, does the system run in real time, and under what conditions does it run in real time?
So yes, the system does run in real time. All these examples actually are captured in real time, except probably one of the few that I showed at the beginning, that it was created with the first version of the model, but once we optimize for performances, all of them run in real time. What I can say that the condition is that there is only one character which we are editing at once. So we can't, now I try once, but it's get too heavy to edit 2 characters, for example. But the condition is there is a kind of limit on the number of editing we can perform at the same times. It can be over a single character. So if the number of warping units, for example, of the number of visual features is too high, then we start losing performances.
Okay. Yeah, you had this nice performance figure, and it looked like it, and maybe you just sort of extrapolated out to very complex scenarios that you're not looking at, but yes, it looked like it could quickly go sub-real time, and so but it's interesting that all of these were real time.
Yes.
Okay. So how do you ensure that you're producing natural motion?
So as I said, we don't really have a system. So that was kind of a problem at the beginning, because we were not really able to control the result. So once we set the parameter, we make the code run, and then we need to check if the result is real or not. We then try to limit whichever is the amount of modification we perform. So the idea is like try to limit as in a way we had a set of limitations, for example, on joint rotation. So we didn't create any unfeasible motion, so the elbow couldn't rotate too much. But except for this, we also limit the amount of limitation from the original motion. And the idea is where we don't want to actually create any motion. We want to maintain what it was the original motion. And so doing that, we have a system that is pretty solid on certain example, like for example, the visibility one, and might break the realism in other. Because for the expressivity, the one we show here, also in the result, we see that sometimes the elbow doesn't look so much realistic. For example, the elbow motion, because we don't really have a system to ensure that the final result is realistic. I don't know if this answers the questions.
Do you have ideas about how you can bound the motion more into something that is natural?
Yeah, we have some sort of ideas. Like the main problem is how the system is conceived. So it's given that it's editing directly kinematic properties. And probably one way can be a better definition of these working units and this motion editing system. So it can be to have some set of predefined motion that are more linked with the animation itself. And that can be a way, which is a bit of hard-coded because it's something that you have to define probably per animation or per group of animation. Or we can have some system that try to evaluate the realism of the motion after the editing and try to maintain a certain level of realism. Yeah, the problem is coming probably from the how our system works. That it's iterative system and it's only try to optimize what is the visual target, but it's not considering other inputs, for example, realism of the motion.
Yeah. How do you set the velocity of the motion of the adjustment now?
Sorry, I didn't heard the.
How do you set the velocity of the adjustment? So
That's
someone's
another
sort of
parameter.
moving so that they can be seen. How do you control how quickly that happens?
That's actually a parameter. We have a parameter of how fast the system tries to get to minimize this target. And this is something that we set manually too. I didn't mention it here, but it's another parameter that we set. So we can have adaptation that is faster, like the one where the character was showing the tablet. It has to be a fast adaptation because the motion is fast itself and is not cyclic. So we can't wait like for the waving motion iteration. Here the adaptation is pretty fast, even though sometimes you still see that it's adapting. And so it's a parameter set by hand for now.
Yeah, you may have ideas about how to automate it, but that seems like something that will actually impact the naturalness depending on the scene, because there may be situations where you want this adjustment to be at a sort of fairly modest rate, which is generally what you show in these examples, and then other scenes where you really want the character to be sort of moving quickly. And I don't know if you have ideas about how you could automate that.
So yeah, that's pretty complex because it's, as you said, depend on cases. So way to automate the velocity can be defining like per cases. So once you record the animation, once you have this animation as input, you set as parameter of this animation which kind of adaptation you want. But that's not probably covering all the cases because maybe you have a case when the waving animation you want to adapt slowly or to adapt faster. So probably the only solution is to link this system, which the one that is running before, because the idea is having a motion synthesis system before, which is generating a motion that it's input in our system, which is edited at the end. So the idea is having maybe considering this whole system as a whole and having more parameter. So knowing, for example, the situation we want to adapt more, adapt faster and slower, and then we can easily plug in this as a parameter. I don't know if I explained it clearly, not sure.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And yeah, I mean, these are not easy things to do. So I appreciate the difficulty. The way that people currently seem to be dealing with this problem is they're like, okay, we don't have a good way of solving this. So we're just going to throw a lot of data at it. And we're going to use some machine learning approach to do this because, yeah, we don't know what this should be, but we can probably learn something reasonable. Why did you avoid that approach in this work?
So there are multiple reasons. First reason was a matter of expertise. So in my case, I didn't deal with any machine learning technologies, even though I studied them. And the second reason was because the idea was to have a system. Firstly, that because this is a kind of a new idea, so it's a proof of concept, and for me, feel a little bit of weak if we use directly machine learning or deep learning without giving a system like this that give an overview of how the tool works, because sometimes in some artificial intelligence system we don't really know how things work inside, so you might get a good result because you have a good amount of data or good data. So the approach was not to use machine learning here because we want to see and we want to be able to control the parameter and see if this approach is feasible. And then why not, as a future work, implement something that is more related based on data.
Okay, that's reasonable. So how might you extend this work to deal with a richer set of adjustments. So for example, if the character is leaning to the side, there should be a balance adjustment, right? If the character is sort of too far, they may need to take a step to adjust. There are a lot of sort of adjustments that the system now can adjust to sort of a certain set of situations, but as those situations get a little more extreme, you need to do a larger change to the motion. Do you have a sense of how you might scale this system up to those cases? Hopefully that's clear. That wasn't the best phrased question, but hopefully you understand.
No, understood. Yes, actually, that's. I think it's kind of a goal of this kind of system, because here, as you said, we just edit motion, and I think to get this to this kind of motion you mentioned, like a step or like balancing itself, we should consider the system of synthesizing motion. So a way to have access, for example, if you have a library of motion, to have feedback the information of visibility, of visual feature that we have, and try to pick the right motion, or try to pick the right synthesis parameter. And this way we can, but the example I did before was sort of like this. So in some example, we have the waving, which is performed with the hand that you probably will not use. Somehow you have occlusion on the right, so you probably just wave with the left hand. It's going to be easier to be seen. Mm-hmm. But here we just get an animation that is already done. So the idea would be to have a way to select which animation to play in advance. And if we have to adjust, for example, a step or a step on the side, the system will know, because the visual feature probably will be more, how to say, if you want to increase coverage, we'll have better coverage if the characters take a step. And so we can feedback this information in the system, in the motion synthesis system, and say, okay, take a step on the right. Because how this works is actually evaluating in which modification will optimize this visual feature. So if we use this to also select the animation or to synthesize new motion, that the system might work. But of course, it's not a simple extension of this tool. It would be a kind of wider tool and different kind of approach.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. Yeah, I'd be interested to see how that goes. Okay, I'll ask two more questions and then hand things off. So in the haptic study, you found no impact on presence and embodiment, which seems a little surprising. And you have a sort of nice explanation for it, that it's just the quality of the haptics wasn't good enough.
Yes.
Do you have evidence for that?
Do we have any evidence for that? That's the question. Sorry, Aditya.
Yeah, do you have evidence that that's why you didn't find that effect?
No,
like,
we
it's a
don't really have
story, but I'm wondering, is there evidence that sort of backs that up?
So we don't have clear evidence. We didn't have like a study to support this. That was actually our conclusion over the study, because when we are analyzing we have the participants performing the study, and the idea is that they were not really aware of this haptic system, so we make them perform this task over and over, and at some point they feel the vibration. So we think that like this, probably the questionnaire will be more effective, because they were not really focusing on, okay, we have the haptic or we don't have the haptic device. They have it always on, but at some point it vibrates. So doing the second part. And so we were, I would say honestly, we were a little bit surprised that we don't have any effect on presence and embodiment too. And the justification we give was, okay, that's probably because the feedback was not real enough, or was not perceived as real enough. But of course, it would be interesting to have a further study to see really this kind of feedback can improve somehow presence of maybe a more detailed system, so that still have vibration as a feedback, but has more control and more precision on where the contact is, might increase presence, for example, might increase the embodiment. But it's something that we need to study in the future.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, what's actually going on there on that. Okay, so one last question, something that's maybe a little more speculative and fun. So you have, in chapter 2, you have this vision-controlled animation system. In chapter 5, you have a cinematography system that's basically controlling how things are viewed. So how would you put these two systems together to do interesting things? What could you do by combining these two?
Yes, that's actually an interesting point. Yeah. Go on, you were saying something or interrupting?
No. I just want to hear your ideas about what can you do now with these two systems by putting them together.
So exactly that was one of the ideas I mentioned fastly at the end. And I like this question because it's what I think too. It might be important and relevant to link them together because it's a certain, in a certain way, it's the same kind of problem. So we try to get an optimal, something optimizing on visibility. So I think the interesting way is having, as I said, a character editing tool. So the one of the animation part, which is kind of aware of where it's seen, even if it's not an observer. Because in all the cases and all use cases we had, the optimization was, okay, we have a point of view of someone that can be a person or can be another character, and we try to create use cases around this. So use case was you are waving, you are kind of having interaction. But what is the use case is, okay, we have a point of view, which is not a person, which is not a character, which is just the point of view of a camera. And so interestingly would be to see, for example, what actor does in cinema and movies. So if the camera is on the right or if the camera is on the left, how they behave, how their motion change, and try to use these as parameter, for example, for control the animation. And also maybe having an animation, a character, an actor performing something, and try to see from which point and this we have to ask probably director or analyze style of movies, from which point of view is better to see this action. So I think, yeah, the problem are kind of linked together strongly, and the idea probably is, because it's hard to link them together like this, because or we control the camera in our problems, or we control the character. But I think conceptually the link is there. I hope this answered the question, or if you have one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a very interesting thing to explore, because quite famously in movie production animation, the character motion will look great from the camera shot. But if you look at it from off shot, often it looks completely ridiculous and it's not physically correct, right? And this is a difference with game motion where the camera is going to be controlled by the user afterwards, right? So it opens up, if you know the camera perspective ahead of time, it really opens up a lot of possibilities for cheating on the motion and cheating in order to increase its communicative power. This is what animators do when they're doing film work. So
yes,
there are interesting possibilities there. But okay, thanks very much. I will pass things on.
Thank you very much for the question.
Okay, so that's the turn of the second reviewer, so Rachel. Thank you for your questions.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the talk, Alberto. It's very nicely presented and very visual and everything. It really gave me a very good idea of some of the questions that I had actually. And you also answered some of my questions from the report in your presentation, so thanks for that. My questions, I completely agree with Michael. I think this idea of the warping animation is really interesting. And again, I think it's an area that hasn't been looked at very much, and I certainly agree as well that it's an area that should be looked at more. One of the issues with having such a kind of novel, I guess, a novel topic is the idea of evaluating it against other methods, right? So I just want to know, for example, how you selected and it was similar with some of your other methods as well, how you selected other approaches to evaluate against. So for example, the motion warping. So what would you consider the next most similar kind of system to evaluate it against? Or a more simple system that might just be using IK or something?
Yes, that's an interesting question, because we think a lot about how to compare this, and it was hard to find a model that was really similar. And that's exactly the problem of having a novel technique. We thought about using some inverse kinematic system, but the problem is that still inverse kinematic needs a target. So it needs a target, for example, for the hand of waving. In this case, it was not waving, but it was just a gesture. I don't know why it's not playing now. It needs a target, and the idea was how we define this target. So we had an idea of creating this kind of inverse kinematic system which select a target in a visible point. that it can be a sort of way to compare our idea with this. But then we feel like it was a bit of cheating because we were using, again, a visibility approach. So it was kind of compared two visibility approaches. It was two new approach. So we had a problem. So what we thought about doing it, that actually we didn't do at the end, is try to record a lot of motion, which was adapted already, and try to select the best one depending on the situation. Then at the end, we decided to use the standard rotation and orientation because in this case, the evaluation question was just based on this. Okay, we orient the motion, and we show that if the character is aware, for example, of occlusion, visual occlusion, it will be better understood what it's doing. But of course, I think there is an open idea of how to evaluate this system, and also which kind of technique we can use to probably what I'm thinking of is not only for visibility, but what if we deal with emotion and the synthesis of expressivity. In this case, I think we have more interesting comparison because there we can really have, for example, an actor perform different expressive motion and see how our tool can enable to create something that it's close enough to the real actor that is performing this action.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Did you think about doing any kind of ablation studies where you looked at your own algorithm and pulled it apart a little bit? Like, for example, your choice of parameters, not even parameters, but your choice more of, the visibility constraints and the different way that you did that. And also things like the Jacobian iterative solver. Did you think about using any other type? Like, why did you select that one in particular? And is it possible that a different solver would come with a different solution that might be better?
Yes. We actually think about this kind of approach. Then, of course, we didn't do it not because we didn't think it was an appropriate evaluation, just because at the end we selected the evaluation that was better fit in the paper we had. But we had this idea of comparing also the parameter selection, for example, having a way to see, okay, why we select this kind of parameter, what happens if you select other parameter and compare different results. Or we had the idea of having participants tune by hand the variation in parameter and let them select which they think maybe was a more expressive motion or introverted motion. And so I think this is a valid option for evaluation that can be done in future works. Regarding the technique, we rely on the Jacobian, inverted Jacobian was because the original aspiration that we say was visual server, but actually the original aspiration was try to create a system for that produce inverse kinematic, not based on the Cartesian space, but based on the visual space of the observer. And so we rely on this approach of, okay, we just start from inverse kinematic and we select this Jacobian technique that is used in inverse kinematic typically. But it's true that we didn't explore deeply different technique that might be more optimal for this kind of problem. And in this, we also need to, for example, rely more on visual servoing that has a different approach that we didn't really follow because we consider it as a sort of inspiration for our work. So the idea was, okay, we just rely on the inverse kinematic that we know it works for animation. But it might be interesting to explore even more how visual servoing deal with this problem and which kind of technique they use.
Okay, great. No, that explains where you got the Jacobian iterative solver because you're coming from an IK method. So yeah, I mean, there's other methods that are a bit faster than that, so it might be interesting to look at. It's similarly then with the camera motion work. The selection of evaluation, or I don't know if you did a huge amount of evaluation on that method. But also the selection of the different, skeletonization, right, ray casting, clusters, and filtering. It wasn't clear to me, were these the only choices, or, where did you come to this conclusion that this was the best pipeline for the method?
I have to say that we don't come to the conclusion that it was the best. That was the pipeline we designed with this idea of abstracting the potential path of a character. So yeah, in the way we work was we think about a scenario that it was mostly this kind of, for example, word scenario, corridor scenario, and how we can follow the action of a character here. But it's true that we didn't explore, we didn't think about variating too much technique. So we did some tests. I did some tests on which kind of way to synthesize a mesh. And so we come up with this idea of using the skeleton because we think it was the extreme synthesis of the mesh, for example. And raycasting, still the idea was just let's extrude the motion, just take a simple solution to get camera position. But I guess there are different techniques we can use. And it would be actually interesting to find different way to extract from the environment camera position and camera tracks. That was just to say just the way we conceived the idea that guide the selection of the technique. Most in that we didn't even here have an exploration of different kind of technique.
Okay, sure. And again, with the evaluation on that method,
Yes.
I guess, you know, would you consider comparing it against some of the machine learning models that are out there, or was that just to beyond the scope of what you were doing at the time?
At the time, we didn't really consider a bigger evaluation, especially what is missing is, as you mentioned, the report is probably an evaluation on perception. Because once we deal with style, yeah, it would be interesting to have also an evaluation of how the style at the end is the result of the style. So our evaluation I will talk about the online part. The style was just there was just a system itself that was evaluating the quality of a frame, and so we didn't have done it in the paper, but we had a sort of evaluation of how good the frame is when the final camera using the metrics we already had in the system. But of course, I think it would be interesting to see how this is perceived and compare it with some other system. And yes, we just did a comparison of the generation of camera to see how our tool can generate less camera. But yeah, that's also for the technical part might be interesting to have a more deeper evaluation and a good comparison.
Okay, great. Thanks for that answer. Okay, so just a few more questions, maybe one or two kind of more technical ones and a bit more high level ones then. Just for the experiment with the haptics, I kind of agree with Michael that I was surprised that the presence wasn't increased with this. I really like this idea of the haptic feedback on walking through the crowd. One kind of more technical question would be related to the XN suit that you have. So, you know, those kind of suits are, you know, known for drift and things like that. You know, do you think the positioning of the feet and the character within the scene was accurate in terms of what the user expected the character to do? You know what I mean? You think
yes, I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, we can see it here, I think, like how they are created. So, not, as you say, it's like, yeah, it's the limitation probably of the XN suit that is not totally accurate, and it's drift a lot. So I remember doing experiment, we had to recalibrate sometimes, because after a while the fit was going away, also someone losing a tracker, and so it might be also the XN system that didn't give a better, for the embodiment part, a better evaluation of the embodiment. Yeah, might be. We didn't really get into this. We just relate everything to the haptic system. But
no, it's just, it seems like a very precise task in terms of positioning of the feet. And I'm just wondering if, you know, you're positioning your feet there and all of a sudden you started to move a little bit, it might be, you know, affecting their decisions a little bit, perhaps. But I know, I mean, you're only, you can, you know, there's only so much you can do when you have, you know, when there's nothing, you know, that's a relevant kind of a constraint of a real practical system anyway, right? So, but it would be interesting maybe to make a little point about that somewhere. One question I was, again, back to your motion warping, and I know there's some kind of online big worlds looking to do kind of things like this, where they're looking to alter the perception, alter some of the maybe personality and maybe aggressiveness even of other people in a virtual world, for example. So for a user that comes into a scene in a virtual world, if they're particularly sensitive or whatever, that they wouldn't maybe see such an aggressive scene or something like that. I'm just wondering, I mean, I guess your system could be good for that kind of a scenario as well, like altering you know, the perceived reality, I guess, of each person, right? They'll be seeing a different reality to the other. So just and it's from a technical point of view, first of all, do you see any issues with that if this was scaled up with lots of different users seeing lots of different versions of things? You know, could that result in, you know, inconsistencies or maybe collisions and things like that? So for example, you're seeing the character waving at you over here, whereas someone else is seeing it waving at them over here. You know what I mean? Could that result in technical inconsistencies in the world, first of all? Or have you thought about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say that the answer is yes, because there is kind of limitations. So as we mentioned before, there is maybe a performance limitation if we try to edit different multiple character. But if you consider that each one, it's seeing the character in a different way, and we imagine that the system works for each person, there might be some problem on the evaluation of visual feature, because the evaluation of visual feature is really sensible to the position of the user. Already scale change a lot if you are closer, you are far, and value change a lot. We try somehow to normalize. So what we do, that I'm not sure I mentioned in the paper, but it should be in the thesis, is that we actually try to get a normalized version of visual feature, having a camera that see the character for exact same distance, and remove all the occlusion and remove all the visual occlusion, and just say, okay, this is the kind of visibility we have, optimal visibility we can have, and then the visual feature value, when they are quantified, they are normalized on this. But also with this normalization, we can have some sudden change in visibility that might create a sort of side effect that is unwanted side effect. So maybe there is something passing through, the system thinks there is no visibility anymore and try to do an adaptation. So I would say that it is possible to create such a system. So to use this system for such an idea of having modification and change the way people perceive different character in different way in a virtual world. And that's actually the goal. But there are still some work to do. And another interesting thing is, yes, you mentioned the aggressivity of a character or something like that. I think that might be also very relevant, because there are some visual features that can be really related with this, like of having aggressive character that try to occupy more, maybe your field of view, or less if they're less aggressive.
And actually on that, do you think it would be possible to implement your technique on avatars, like not just agents that are around, you know, so it's an actual person that's being aggressive? Can you tone them down when you're looking at them?
So.
Say,
Yes,
I don't want to look at any of these aggressive people, please.
Yes. Technically, yes. I mean,
Technically,
still solving all the problem of before, but yes, that's actually one of the also use cases we had in mind.
Okay, great. That's super interesting, and yeah, possible ethical implications as well, I guess, which could be very interesting to study in the future. Okay, I don't want to take up all the time. Just one other thing I wanted to talk about was this idea of cinematography and VR that you were discussing there with Michael a bit as well. I recently was talking with this artistic company that were working on this real-time, basically like a play. So one of their actors was acting live a character, and then all of the audience were interacting with that character live. And one of the big challenges they had was that the actor, who are used to kind of knowing in theatre or in film, they know where to look at in terms of their audience. In this case, the audience could just come up and do whatever they wanted, and they could even, some of them just even disappeared off while the person was trying to act. So it was very challenging for the actor to try to manipulate their body and move around so that they were facing the audience. Do you see any kind of, with regard to your cinematography approach and also your warping approach, do you see any potential future solutions to this kind of challenges with cinematography and VR?
Yes, I mean, I think that might be kind of the goal of this two technique, is being able to control the two ways, because in VR, I guess it's hard to focus the attention of audience somewhere.
Yeah.
But if we are able to edit the technique in a way that the actor performance is perceived differently by different audience, so that everybody feels that the actor is performing toward them, definitely yes. And the cinematography approach might give you an idea of which one is probably best camera position or best camera position to evaluate. So if I have to link them together in my mind, generally speaking, we can have a system that evaluates which one is the optimal way to frame a certain action, so creating an optimal point of view, having this as a kind of reference for the actor to perform, for the actor performances, and then try to adapt this to the different point of view of the audience. So that can be a framework that in general will cover all these issues.
Like, would you envision having to restrict the users a little bit so they don't just run off, or
Yeah,
would you
yes.
think that would be necessary? Yeah.
Probably yes, but
Stop them.
not sure.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. I think that's all my questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next.
Thank you for the interesting question. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So I guess, Nuria, you also have questions.
Yeah.
So that's
Well,
it.
thanks for the presentation. It was very nice. And I think a lot of the questions have been covered already by Rachel and Michael. So I might overlap a little bit because I have some other things to clarify. So first of all, again, I liked a lot your chapter 2 because it's a really novel approach for character animation, which is really interesting. And you have presented it as a method to have characters that interact with the user, but I think it could be also very useful if you move on later on for crowd simulation, for instance, when you want to have the people in the crowd that appear to be interacting somehow. This technique could also help to make the interactions between the individual and the crowd seem more realistic than what we currently have. So other things, or I will go a little bit, not in order, I'll try my best. So for example, on the first part, on chapter 2, where you're talking about modifying the animation so that they seem to pay more attention, or they try to get the attention of the user. But in this chapter, if I understand correctly, you're not handling gaze yet, right? So you were not considering on top of waving to make sure the person was looking at initially, right? It's not something that was
Yes.
okay. It's included later on in the perceptual study that you do. So my main thing when I was reading chapter 2 is that I really like the results, but I was thinking, if as a user I wanted to use this system, what exactly does it involve at this stage? Because, for example, you need to define the parts of the body and the working units that you need to modify. You need to define between what limits you can move them, not just what's possible for the skeleton, but also maybe what's realistic. You might want to author somehow whether most of the movement should go on for the shoulder or the wrist, for example. So all these aspects, how are they authored right now? Is it just parameters that you have hard-coded, or how do you do this right now?
So right now the tool was a parameter set by hand, but there are certain patterns that we follow. So ideally, the system for a user, not the system how it is now, but ideally how it should work, it should allow you to have your motion database, so you have the animation, and for each animation you can have a sort of label, so like relevant body parts. That is something like we can extract, for example, having like a saliency evaluation on which part of the body is more salient. So if the hand is moving, probably the hand is going to be more salient. So idea we're going to have, we start typically by selecting the body parts. That's what we do manually, but we can have a technique to do it. Then we select the warping units that are related to these body parts. So they evaluate the technique and the limits. We never really touch them. So we set the limits once, and the limits are limited to limit of, as you said, the elbow not moving. This is something that we're defining at the beginning for the character model and was not touched for each example. And then we had warping units, but the things I don't mention, they come from the question. There is also the intensity. So how fast we adapt, how wide we adapt, and that's actually kind of parameter that nowadays, yes, it's mostly manual setup. But we had a lot of idea while setting up manually how to automate this for a final user. So we have some idea of depending, I don't know if you want to know some detail of some part or how can be automatized. But yes, so for a final user, it's still a little bit. But the idea is, in a final version, would be to have animation, its own label, and actually, as labeling, something I didn't mention, we can also have the optimal point of view. So if the animation is an interactive animation, so we have someone waving. When we record the animation, we design animation, we have someone in mind. So the actor that has to wave to someone. Typically, we were recording animation, we have someone in front, and you have to wave. And so it's something we actually information that we actually might need in the animation system to label the animation, so to know which one is the optimal point of view to see this motion, if it's interactive motion. So all this kind of information has to be taken into account whenever we use the system. So that's why the system nowadays, I don't think it's ready for a user to use.
Okay, because the thing that confused me a little bit was then later on in the chapter, for example, when you move this word to add expressivity to the characters, actually with the example you have now, there are some images in page 50 where there are strokes showing the amplitude of the movement or whether the character looks a bit down, etc. And I was wondering whether that was the way of editing and authoring the movement, or that's something you added later on to explain the differences between the original and the word movement. So I assume it's something you edited afterwards, no?
So the idea is that's the result we obtain with the parameterization. So the parameter we set had this in mind. So in the example of this, it's not playing, of this animation, for example. So then we had the picture when we set a certain frame of the result we obtain. When we had the face that look down, what we think, so we get a parameter, we get the face as a relevant body part. And we try to reduce the coverage, and we get the neck to move. So we had already defined the modification we kind of wanted, and then we set the parameter in a way that this modification take place. I don't know if this was the point you were not sure about.
Yes, no, what I was saying is that you added in the pictures on the thesis, you add some drawings.
No, the drawings was just to show which one is the modification. Yes.
Exactly. So I think that could be a good initial point towards a future authoring tool. Just with a few gestures indicating exactly how you want to modify, the extent of the changes.
Yes.
So, okay, so
that's a good point, because at the end, visually, when we see the animation, we know what we want also as a visual result. So it would be easy to have someone like just draw. Okay, we want this to be smaller, I want it to be bigger on my field of view, and then having the tool editing. Yes, that can be an approach, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and also I had a few comments, but Michael mentioned them already. The interesting things would be also, for example, to have the character doing a little translation, a sidestep, if that can help increase the visibility. Or, for example, you mentioned maybe waving with the other hand. So I had written down mirroring animations in case that the dominant hand is not visible and the other one maybe is visible or whatever. So that could help also. Okay, so that's nice because I think a lot of the questions were really covered. About the perceptual study, I guess this is something, it happens very often when you run perceptual studies, that is something you don't think about before the experiment, and it comes out later on and you wonder why you didn't think about it and include it, because I was thinking about the gaze part. So at the end of the experiment, you assume that from the comments you got from the participants, gaze played a very important role in people understanding who was being waved at. And I wish there had been another condition where maybe you didn't have any of the motion adaptation, just the gaze, and see whether that was clearly the winner. No? But again, probably one of those things that you realize after the experiment, and running the whole thing again is too painful, I guess.
Yes, no, exactly this, because that's also was an open question. So we just say, mention which one the clue that you... So that's things that, while analyzing the data, is not even the first things you look at it, because there was open question. So at the end, when I check the open question, then I see that each participant mentioned the eye, mentioned the gaze, mentioned the participant. Then you say, okay, well, I should have taken more attention to this, the design of the experiment. Yeah, of course, then for timing, we just mention this and we move over. But yes, that was really interesting. And I think the same, because me, I just implement a system to orient the gaze and say, okay, just point at the target. For me was, okay, that's just to not create any confusion. But at the end, it was really important.
I see. Okay, then about this chapter also, the one thing I didn't fully understand was it's clear how you use the visual occlusions to modify the movement of the character, but you also mentioned lighting in many places, and I don't fully understand how the lighting was taken into account, because I mean it's not clearly explained, and actually the only place where you show a video about lighting is to show a case where it didn't work.
Yes,
because it was too dark. So how exactly was the lighting being considered?
I don't have the video here, but the lighting it's actually because it came out after, it was not in the original idea, but as soon as we developed the system and we were playing on the rendering of the scene, we have access to a set of information. And one of these information was actually illumination, because we know for each fragment of the scene, or fragment of the character, how much is illuminated. Because this is used by the shader to illuminate. So we say, why don't we include this? So it was just an addition. We didn't get too much deep in the detail. So we have some example in which we use lighting, and I don't have the video here, but we show like that it works similarly. So when the character is in dark, he tries to get in the light. But this system is still really basic. So what we do is just set a threshold of a certain level of illumination of the film. So above this threshold is visible, and under this threshold is not visible, which was for me was at the beginning was enough. But then they also, my supervisor to say, they mentioned the fact that that's not only defining actually visibility, because you can have a character that is full dark, but if the background is all illuminated, then you clearly see it. But our system still think that it's totally not visible. So I think this illumination is actually a good point to develop, and to get a system that's very more complex, that can evaluate illumination, and can also evaluate difference of, also for the color, for example. We never evaluate color, but what if someone is dressed as red and the wall is completely red, and so you don't see it? And that's something that is still related to visibility, and can still be computed using, for example, the model we have, and can be taken into account whenever we modify the motion. So yeah, I think it's illumination was just an idea, and was just something that will make easily working, but it's something that we can explore more.
Right. Okay. All right. Then moving on to the next part on studying how the gaze is perceived in a crowd. It's not clear to me how you select the active agents in the crowd, because in the picture you show there's a couple of agents that you cross.
Yes.
Because they're too. The distance with the other ones is too small, and you want to spread them. It seems like you want to spread them a little bit.
So here was just an example, yes.
The center one can be active, but the left and right one are crossed in the paper, so that they're well spread in the horizontal axis.
Yes, that's what we.
But that's the distance to the user have an impact, because the ones in the front row should be more visible or more noticeable, maybe, than the ones in the back row. So did you consider that?
Yeah, we consider also the distance as when we are analyzing the data. So we had a set of as you said, we had the horizontal spreading. So we had we know which character was on the left and the right. We had a sort of group. So we have the group for horizontal spread, but also for close and far distance. But we didn't really find any big differences between front and back. That's because the character are not really, there is not too much far. When you see it in virtual reality, we didn't see a bigger difference, but we found a bigger difference when the character was central and when on the side. And we thought this was due to the field of view of the VR. And also, as you can see in the picture, in the virtual image we actually have a sort of highlights on the eyes. So the eyes are really visible. So the white part of the eyes is whiter, and the pupil part is more visible than in the real scene. So also for this, I think there was a less impact on distance, because it was really clear when someone was seeing you, and it was front or back row. But it's something that for sure is affect. So if someone is closer, so I think our crowd was too small, and it was not spread too much in distance.
Okay. And the other aspect that I would think would surprise the participants is, so there's meant to be another person next to you who's giving a speech, but you decided to have no speech, no voice in the experiment. Why is that?
The reason it was because we were trying to be as close as possible to the previous study that was on photography.
Okay.
And so we didn't want to have some input, some stimuli that can affect the user decision. But yeah, it's true that when we tested, it was a little bit weird. We just say, okay, you have someone presenting there. At the beginning of the trial, participant can look and see, like there was a blackboard or something like a character. So say, okay, the virtual crowd is typically looking there because there is a speech. But then there was no speech. So it was a little bit weird for the participant. So it might be interesting to explore even more. But our idea was just try to be as close as possible to what is the work we want to compare with, to have a more clear comparison. But it's true that then this can have a side effect like this one.
Right, but I would think that in a photo you obviously don't expect anybody to talk.
Yes, but in the virtual
VR you have a person, especially if it's gesturing. I don't know if it was gesturing.
No, the person at the end
it was.
They typically were instructed participants to observe the crowd. So the idea was they are there, they are seated close to the person that speaks, and they have to observe the crowd. So during the trial, they were supposed, and typically they should just observe the crowd, the people in front of them. So they had this instruction. So they were not following, they were not seeing any time the person speaks. So the only things that we could have had is the voice. So you could have known that there is a speak. But then we would have had, for example, character reaction that maybe they're showing interest in the speech. While we try to get as natural as possible. So character was pretty natural. The only motion they had was just blinking from time to time. So it was a pretty, I have to say, weird scenario. Because probably we try to be as pure as possible. But as you said, the problem might be that photography, we don't expect to have anything. So as a motion or as a sound, while in VR, yes. So I think it would be good to consider this kind of aspect and see what is changing in the result.
Okay. Now, moving on to the next chapter on studying collisions when moving through a virtual crowd. I'm bringing up a little bit of discussion. It was started before, but I just wanted to add a bit more. The issue with presence and embodiment. So, this is one topic that I've discussed many times with Melis later because it can drive me crazy with some experiments. And it's the fact that the presence questionnaires are well known for being, this is a subjective measurement. People don't always respond in the best way. They don't clearly identify the differences between the conditions you're testing. And in a way, like Mel and others many times suggest not to use only questionnaire because they're subjective, to use objective measurements. And an objective measurement is how people are moving, how people are reacting, how people are behaving, the behavioral response in that situation. And in your case, the behavioral response does change quite a lot. The movement of the torso changes, the amount of collisions changes, the velocity changes. So I would say that from an objective point of view, through the presence questionnaires, you did not find a difference. But from a more objective point of view, studying the behavioral response of the participants, you do have, certain differences that clarify. I think they clearly identify that people are more present in these other conditions. Embodiment is a bit harder, but for presence,
yes,
I would not say there was no difference in presence. I'll say questionnaires did not show a difference, but the behavioral response of the participant, which is more objective than the other measurement, does show significant differences. So just a little bit of discussion there, because it happens very often, and I have the feeling that sometimes the presence questions can be a bit ambiguous for the participants, and I have the feeling that a lot of the times participants don't really know exactly what they're answering, and that's why you cannot see clear differences, but that's my opinion.
Yes, I know that it's an open discussion. I know that people try to look this find this indirect measurement for evaluating. And that's actually an interesting point. Yes,
I mean, you have the possibility of doing physiological measurements as well, which you didn't have here. But yeah, I think behavioral response, the way you were measuring it, it's also a valid way of measuring presence, for example. So just to clarify that. The one thing that did surprise me is on page 91, you have a couple of pictures showing the differences between haptics, no haptics, haptics, and the learning no haptics afterwards. And it's interesting because you had significant differences in the number of collisions, but not in the volume of the collisions.
Yes.
Any explanation? Any thoughts about why that would happen?
Yes, because that's the
I'm not sure if you had the graph in the presentation. It's in the.
I have something on collision, no, here.
Yeah,
that's
that one.
Yeah, that's
yes, exactly.
significant difference.
Yeah, so the difference appears on the left-hand side, which is number of collisions, but not on the volume of the collisions.
Yes, me, I have an idea. I don't know if you mentioned it in the paper, but the fact was that the volume, it was really clear that it reduced with haptic because you feel the vibration and people start to have as a response that is kind of instant response, so they kind of move away. And that was really, so it was really effective when you have the haptic feedback. As soon as you don't have it, so you might reduce the number of collisions because you might be more careful, but as soon as you have a collision and you don't know, you keep colliding. So I think the volume is something of getting aware that you are colliding and so reduce it, and so we reduce the volume because the volume was computed over time. So there was a collision and for all the time of the collision, we compute the volume and we average the volume over this whole time. So my idea was that when you have the haptic, you also have a feedback, because sometimes you don't, in this kind of experiment, I try, of course, that when you pass by, sometimes you think you're not colliding. And if you don't have any feedback, you go on and maybe you can collide for a long time without noticing. As soon as you have the haptic feedback, you have this collision simulation, then you get responses and you automatically move. So why the number of collision changes? Because you say the behavior change. Why not the volume? Because I think sometimes when there was a collision, there was no. It means that the person didn't really think there would be one. I don't know how to explain. So that's my idea. It's not very super clear. That's why we didn't mention it. But I think it's just because the volume is over time, and the number is probably more.
Okay.
Set.
Is it possible, just wondering here, that the fact that the haptic information that you're receiving, which is this kind of 4 points of vibration, is not giving you accurate information of exactly how the collision is happening, and thus you cannot correct it properly?
Yes, also this. Yes, also this. Yeah, it also can also be the case, because the collision, as you can see, is computed over all the mesh of the character, but the feedback was not clearly sometimes identified. Even though when you have collision, you have the feedback, maybe it was not precise enough. So it might be also this, because we only have 2 per arm, so it's possible that it was not.
And you don't know if it's a frontal collision of the shoulder or the back. You're just feeling a vibration.
You just feel it, exactly. You just feel a vibration. Yes.
Okay. So I think I covered most of it. I have one last question about the camera movement. Well, 2 questions about camera movement actually. 2 things about your method. I'm not very familiar with these techniques to find paths for the camera, but I was wondering, what you want with the camera typically, I would assume, is to minimize the number of positions you need in your graph while maximizing visibility, right? Is that something you consider in this system? Because it seems like you're throwing from the skeleton, you're just throwing out these rays to get possible positions for the cameras. But for example, when sampling, how often you cast rays for these positions? Do you consider what's the field of view of the cameras you want to use later on to avoid casting too many rays or something like that?
Yes, that was actually a point. It's an interesting point because we try a lot of different idea over that. So the idea of the question might be how many rays we cast, no?
Yes.
And so if you cast 2 less rays, you risk to lose some information of visibility. Like here there is a corridor with windows. So whenever there is a lot of windows, but if there is only one window, you might lose the ray that go out of the window. So you might lose a potential point of view of like outside view of a corridor, for example. So we need to have more, as kind of detailed raycast. So we need to have a lot of points. So we end up thinking, okay, we need to do enough, kind of enough, like you can see here. That's still a parameter we set, but we don't really set it with few points, but with more. And then the idea was that then we try to filter out. So if I'm not wrong, we had a technique when points were aligned, because when we kind of find the most relevant direction for line to create tracks, and then in that phases, we try to remove the points that are redundant. So when in the same line, you have too much multiple point, and then you try to reduce and get less point. So yes, getting less point is still an objective. So having less camera points and camera tracks means having less computational cost in real time. So yes, that's kind of one of the objectives of the paper. But the raycasting part was a little bit tricky because it was reading our understanding of the environment and our understanding of what's outside of the workable path.
Okay. And finally, about the camera movement, I mean, this is totally automatic camera movement, I assume. What about often games allow the player to have control on the camera orientation, for example, so that the player can focus on the things that are most interesting? Is it possible to combine this technique with some level of control for the player?
Yeah, we didn't think about that, but that's an interesting point, because in our idea, this was from outside viewer. We never really think that this camera would have been used for control, but yes, why not? Because at the end, once we create this camera graph, and once we claim that we create a sort of cinematographic style, there might be, for a game experience, a sort of like, probably this can be a view that in a game you can use to control. Mm-hmm. We didn't think about it, but, well, we can have some parameter in the evaluation of our frame. For example, if you want to have a camera, typical game camera that's following from the back, we can add a parameter in the evaluation of the framing that always try to be on the back of the character and always try to look at where the character is going. That's more or less what's happening here. So here we try to follow the character, but then giving a control over a user, I need to think about it, because then it might be possible, might be like a sort of way of having a sort of control on a set of parameters of the frame evaluation. So maybe we want to be a little bit further from the character. So we have a parameter that change in the style of the frame. And so now the optimal frame get further away, get closer away. So I think it's possible. It might be an interesting solution.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you for the question.
So before giving the talk to the supervisor, I will ask two small questions. The first one is about physical modeling. So in your opinion, would you improve the adaptation of the movement by attributing to the characters, but also to the environment, physical characteristics, at least for the element with which the user is likely to collide?
Yes. We're talking about the work on editing of animation, right? The first work, or in the... Yes, so yes, I think having a physical model for certain part, especially for the character motion, might help in reducing this problem with breaking the realism of the character. Because once we can simulate physically, we can also know which motion is more appropriate. For example, when it's the character holding a tablet on the shield, if we have a sort of idea, if we can use this in the system of the weight of this shield and the weight of this tablet, we can create a motion that is more appropriate. As we said before, the question before was related to how fast we adapt the motion. Well, if you have a really heavy shield, maybe you expect the character to adapt slower than if you're just holding a phone. And that can be a physical parameter we can fit in the system. So I guess, yes. My only worry is related to performances. That's the downside. But in terms of like, if in an ideal world where performance is not a problem, definitely, I would just definitely wait for including physical parameter in the system.
Mm-hmm. And a very general question is, I understand that there are real-time issues here, simulation. So to what extent should multiple sensory devices be added to the user, to the virtual characters, or to the environment to achieve a certain level of realism? And how do you think you can manage the trade-off between algorithmic complexity and green computing? That's a very
Yes.
maybe philosophical question, but did you think about that? To what extent could you add many multiple devices, sensory devices?
But it's related to sensory device to the user or in the virtual?
At least for the user, but you could also add some kind of sensory motor devices to the different objects in the environment.
Yes. So
that you really react, in fact.
Yes, yes. So I have to say that in terms of real-time problem performances, I don't know to which extent. But in terms of information we need, yes, of course, if you have more, it's better. But I think the goal of what we need to do is try to combine what we have as information to try to achieve the best result. I don't know if this is a kind of synthesis answer your question or what specific detail.
I don't know, because I see that you miss some kind of information, so you add something, and then you add something else, and then you add something else.
Yes.
So my question was more general. How
Yes.
would you analyze globally the virtual scene and think about all these sensory devices? Like people do that in robotics too. So they try to add things, sensory motor devices to the
Yes.
system, which is moving in the scene. And maybe there's the same kind of problem here. So
Okay, I
I
understand.
don't know if
Yes.
I do not have the response.
No, actually, I think me neither, but I think that's an interesting point, because then there is a trade-off between how much sensor information you need and how much you want to, what is the simulation result you want to obtain. And the goal is typically to minimize what is sensor information, even though sometimes I guess it's important to have more and more information, because the ideal would be to have the less number of information needed to perform whatever task you need to perform. But as I said before, ideally if we could have all the sensor information, but maybe the system would be too complex to evaluate, but it would be more clear and more detailed. So I think so. And that's the example of robotics. I understand something like to have the character maybe more aware of what's his surrounding, knowing where are the object, where are these. So I agree. It's a tough question. It's difficult to answer, but that's the interesting point. No, it's okay.
Thank you very much. So I
Thank
had another question, but it was also covered by Michael about machine learning. So I will just stop, and the supervisors can talk now, and maybe Julien, who is the director, can talk on the behalf of the three other supervisors.
Yeah, I will do this given the crowd of advisors you have. So it's a late defense. I mean, late in the day. So maybe it's better that I speak on behalf of everyone. But feel free to interrupt me and correct me or add something if you wish. I will just make some comments about how this PhD unfolded and how happy I was, generally speaking, about how things went. I will first talk about the difficulty of your topic. So I think all of us, we have underestimated the difficulty of the topic we gave to you, because we gave you sort of a general idea and asked you to play with that, and we have underestimated. So you needed actually from the beginning to deliver this proof of concept that you mentioned a couple of times. And we expected this to come very early in your PhD, and it took a bit of time. That's fine. I mean, this is we cannot anticipate everything. And the difficulty was related to many things. So as said, it was the first time this idea was explored, right? So we had no idea, so nothing to compare with, for example, to show that we can have an improvement or initial point to start from and then build on that to really explore this idea. Or difficulty was also in the absence of code. So you have really technically done everything. In this work, in every chapter, the technical contribution to the haptic rendering on collision detection, the chapter 2 is fully yours, and this one as well. So And it's sort of ungrateful to do this. It doesn't pay.
Yes. A pain learning experience.
Yeah, I hope that you will exploit. So my recommendation is to feel free to take this idea with you and to exploit it later on if you go for an academic career. I have to comment on the autonomy with which you explore this. So technically speaking, and something which is should be noticed is that you, in the end, you didn't deviate that much from the initial goal we gave you. Like very often it goes somewhere else, right? Or it takes a direction. But here, from the very early discussion we had at the cafeteria with me,
Yes.
mimicking the visual system, you should explore it, etc. You really, in the end, you were successful at delivering this proof of concept, and I'm very happy to see this is working. As I said, it didn't pay enough, in my opinion. I was expecting this question about machine learning, and we also had this idea that machine learning should be used probably more to control the parameters of this method than to really produce the motion. I think we need an understanding, a deeper understanding on how this ID can help, where it can be efficient in an animation system, what it can be used for before going to this data-driven kind of approach. And I want also to mention that this concept you explored is generalizing well on many examples. You showed a number of them, but it would work also on cats, for example, for which you would have a lack of data, probably, where you see those two cats fighting one another, turning their body, inflating their fur so that they look bigger than they are, or more strong than they are. So it applies to peacock when they open their tail, right? It applies to many things. So I think there is an idea here. I was surprised myself it wasn't explored by the community, and I think there is a value, and you demonstrated this value, and I would like to thank you for that. My last comment will be about your devotion to the team that I appreciated very much. I think many of people behind me can say that at some point they got some technical support from you. And that's very something we should appreciate. Maybe it explains a bit also the variety of your contribution. You help there, you help here, and in the end, we want you to sort of claim something about that. So this is why you have this variety of contribution, and I think it's important that you actually respect this choice of showing them all, and the hard time you have to find this continuity in your so we discussed this a lot. So in conclusion to this, I think we all had very much pleasure of advising you, and maybe you were a bit too silent on your technical challenges, the one you faced, and the problem you probably had, and so each meeting was a bit like this, and your defense is also a bit like this. You sort of hide the technical mess, right? And say, don't worry. Like it's like you don't want to annoy us with that, right? I think you should annoy people a bit more. That would be to your benefit, and maybe some kind of recommendation I'm making to your future advisors, whoever they are. Okay? So thank you again for all this work, and now we'll see if you are getting the degree or not.
So now it's time to deliberate. So I don't know exactly where we are going, but
just go next door.
Yeah, so
next door.
We will move. We will reconnect Michael and Rachel if you can reconnect to this other link you have. Thank you.
always this way.
I think the camera might only be I rotate once to here and have my computer camera.
Is this one open?
What? We have two cameras because one that's actually
Oh yeah, so if you turn it a bit, it's like it goes away a bit.
The hausse. The hausse.
Okay. So,
yes, there is a limited yes. I think it's new for everyone.
It's one more thing to think about.
Yes.
okay, that's in the legislation, so you have to say. So I will read my report in English, if you don't mind.
No, as you prefer also. Yeah, you should let Tina.
Yes, I will do this.
La caméra.
Okay.
We need Julie. Okay. So after the deliberation, Alberto, we wrote some little report that I am going to read to you. So you presented the results of your doctoral research in a very clear and didactic way to an international jury. During your presentation, you illustrated very well the scope of your work, which focuses on the modeling of expressive and reactive virtual human movement in interactive applications and their ability to account for nonverbal behaviors. In particular, you showed how your models support a range of experiences in virtual and augmented reality. So, Alberto, your presentation highlighted your many contributions to issues of motion warping based on visibility and saliency, haptic feedback, gaze perception, and camera placement in virtual scenes. You also answered the numerous questions from the jury with precision and ease, demonstrating your great mastery of the field. And for all these reasons, the jury unanimously decided to award you the degree of Doctor of the University of Rennes in the specialty of computer science. Congratulations, but before you have to accept.
Yes, accept.
Something which is new in the doctoral school, he has to read a little text in English or in French, which is an oath, a scientific oath.
Yeah, I will do it in English, but I'm not sure about it. So, in the presence of my peers, with the completion of my doctorate in computer science, in my quest for knowledge, I have carried out demanding research, demonstrated intellectual rigor, ethical reflection, and respect for the principle of research integrity. As I pursue my professional career, whatever my chosen field, I pledge to the greatest of my ability to continue to maintain integrity in my relationship to the knowledge, in my methods, and in my results. I need to thank. So first, I want to thank the member of the jury, the one that are connected from far, and I know, for example, Michael, the timing is not optimal, but thank you for joining. It was really an honor for me to have you, to have Rachel, and to have the member here. Thank you, Nuria, and thank you, Sylvie. It was really a pleasure to say. And then I want to thank all my group of supervisors. That was really long time. It's a hard time, but you really helped me a lot. And so thanks, Mark. Thanks, Julian. Thanks, Frederic and Claudia. But also there is additional supervisor that Anne-Hélène, for example, and Katia and Pierre that I consider as my site supervisor, with which I collaborate and work. And and then we have I didn't prepare anything, so that's just. I want to thank all the people I've met here since day one, since when I arrived. That make me feel immediately at home. So all the first students that passed, all the students that passed. I just remember. I don't want to say too many names because I'm probably gonna forget someone. But the first people I met, like Benjamin, Amaury, Ludovic, Anthony, this year, and I'm so sure I'm forgetting something. Rebecca, Diane, and all the people that I met when I arrived. That was really important for me, and the way they introduced me to this world and this stuff. And I try to do the same with new people that come and the other people I've met after. So there are a lot of art here. So thank you all of you. Thanks. I need to thank also Adele, which I share the same project, and also the office, all the office mates I have, Thomas now, and also Ludovic, who's an office mate with me, and Ellen. And all the people that are here, I would like to hold your name. But really, thank you very much for all for everything. And then I thank my family, Dario, family, all the people that were helping me during this little bit more than 3 years. Thank you very much. As important for people here, there's going to be a pool in salle so we all can all go there. We're going to prepare, we have some food and something to drink. And for the people connected online, thank you again. It was thank you for joining. I'm sorry you cannot join for the poll, but I don't know what to say.
You will
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Congratulations, Alberto. You did an excellent job today.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure being on the jury. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So,
Enjoy your food. Bye.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I can.
Finally, maybe. What was the last day of your contract?
Yes.
The latest defense in many sense, in the day and in the contract. Anyway, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I did prepare words.
That's fine.
Yes, that's the most important part.
Congratulations. Finally done. It's really nice work. So, quite wide.
Thank you also from before because you were also professor when I was a professor.
That's right. Yeah, I keep forgetting that. Yeah. I always forget. It's true. Yeah.
You're the first person between all the professors that see me from before.
Yeah, it's true. It's good to see the evolution.
Hopefully there is a result after.
What are you doing afterwards? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, actually I will fly tomorrow to Ireland. You know, we're starting a postdoc with Rachel.
Oh, okay.
I will fly tomorrow. It's going to be a kind of, I think, 2 years project. I do not so much in case.
Yeah,